Hello, Evan Dyer, CBC News. Just looking back to the first Donald Trump term and the talks that led up to the creation of CUSMA TMEC, it seemed like there was more public and visible coordination between Canada and Mexico, more talk of a common front approach than we're seeing now. And I'm just wondering, the Americans at the time were very clear they preferred to deal with the two countries separately. Have Canada and Mexico more or less accepted that that's how it has to be? Or do you still see opportunities for a common front approach when negotiating with the United States?
You want me to start?
No, again, as I said before, there are many issues that their own nature is bilateral. And because of that, we need to work with the United States each to resolve them. Of course, when it's appropriate, we have trilateral conversations, as it has happened, for example, as soon as July 1st. And whenever it's necessary, we also consult with each other, and that's why I'm here. And there's also excellent communication between our trade teams. But of course, there are many issues with which we need to communicate directly with the United States.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just build on that by saying that, my first visit to Mexico was early August 2025, just 2.5 months or so after I was named to this position. And one of the reasons I chose to go to Mexico as one of the first countries to visit was because of the strong relationship, but the need to continue to build strong ties economically and across the board with one of our largest trading partners. I want to stress that this partnership is about trade and investment, but it is also about the people-to-people ties that very much ground the relationship and serve to enhance then the business-to-business ties and the important work that our government is doing. And so back to your question, Evan, we'll keep working on all fronts. We will work hard on the bilateral relationship with Canada and the United States, and we'll also work on the trilateral relationship as being led by Janice Charette, our chief trade negotiator, and Minister LeBlanc. But there is every reason to be positive about the Canada-Mexico relationship.
Notice what neither of them actually said. Nobody in that room denied the premise. Nobody said, no, we've built a strong united front against Washington. What they said, carefully, diplomatically, was that some issues are bilateral by nature, which is a polite way of confirming the reporter's question was correct. Nearly a decade after Trump's first term, Canada and Mexico are still largely negotiating with the U.S. one at a time, exactly the way his administration preferred it back then. This press conference wasn't really about that question, though. It was called to mark Mexico's foreign secretary visiting Ottawa, and on paper, it was a good news story. Canada and Mexico announced roughly $12 million in new joint projects, funding for the UN's Human Identification Program to help identify missing and deceased persons, a $5 million initiative with the UN and Interpol to fight human trafficking and migrant smuggling networks across 4 countries, and up to $7 million to expand Canada's satellite-based dark vessel detection technology into Mexican waters, helping catch illegal fishing operations. Trade between the two countries now sits above $62 billion a year, making Mexico Canada's third-largest merchandise trading partner, and recent trade missions generated more than 3,700 business meetings and a $770 million mining investment. But the real tension in that room wasn't about any of those numbers. It was about USMCA, or CUSMA, as Canada calls it, and whether Mexico might strike its own separate deal with Washington and leave Canada to fend for itself. One reporter asked it almost that bluntly. Is Mexico further along in trade talks with the Americans, and would it be willing to go it alone? Velasco's answer avoided a flat denial, framing USMCA as a trilateral agreement in principle, while acknowledging that each country is working through its own bilateral issues with Washington in its own way. That's a diplomatic answer, but it's not a reassuring one if you're Canada, hoping Mexico won't cut a separate deal that leaves Ottawa negotiating from a weaker position. Reporters also pushed on Chinese electric vehicles flooding both countries' markets, a sore point for Washington in the current CUSMA review. Velasco confirmed Mexico introduced new tariffs on Chinese vehicles earlier this year as part of a broader industrial strategy, while pointedly noting Mexico continues looking for ways to lower the tariffs the United States has already imposed on Mexican goods, a reminder that Mexico is dealing with its own Trump-era tariff pressure, not just Canada. Anand confirmed Canada has returned to pre-pandemic levels of Chinese vehicle imports, roughly 3% of the market, and framed the entire conversation around protecting Canadian jobs and businesses, while keeping access to America's market secure, access that, under this administration, can no longer be taken for granted. The sharpest exchange of the whole press conference had nothing to do with trade. A reporter asked directly about pressure from Secretary of State Marco Rubio to dismantle the International Criminal Court and whether either country might follow Washington's lead. Velasco gave a careful non-answer, noting Mexico wouldn't comment on another country's position while reaffirming its own commitment to multilateral institutions. Anand's answer was considerably more pointed. She stated plainly that the ICC should not be politicized, reaffirmed Canada as a founding member and strong supporter of the court, and, speaking as a former law professor, argued there is no scope for political interference in the independence of judges anywhere. She didn't name Trump or Rubio directly, but there was no mistaking who that answer was aimed at. Put it all together, and this press conference revealed something more honest than either government probably intended. Canada and Mexico are cooperating closely on migration, fishing, and human rights projects. But on the issues that actually matter most to Washington, trade, tariffs, and now international law, both countries are still negotiating separately, still bilateral by default, exactly the dynamic Trump's team wanted from the start. The friendship is real. The united front against American pressure, judging by these answers, still isn't. Trump's first-term strategy was simple. Keep Canada and Mexico talking to Washington one at a time, never as a bloc. Nearly 10 years later, based on what these two ministers just said in front of cameras, that strategy is still working exactly as designed. Do you think Canada and Mexico should be pushing harder for a real united front against U.S. trade pressure, or is bilateral negotiation just the more realistic path? Subscribe to Unbiased Canada, hit like, and let us know in the comments.